Hi, everybody. We are going to get started in just a moment. So excited for this conversation. Just going to give folks a couple of minutes to get logged in, and then we'll take it away. Alrighty. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am Rachel Hodgson. I'm your host and the president and CEO of the International Well Building Institute, taking you deep into a conversation on the Well Executive webcast platform with one of my most trusted advisors, Chrissa Pagitsas. When I'm thinking deeply about market transformation strategy, Chrissa is one of the first people that I call. For those of you who are new to the Well Executive platform, I will be introducing you to iconic leaders from across a variety of sectors and geographies, giving you an opportunity to hear directly from the source how they take care of their people, their stakeholders, and customers, and perhaps most importantly, how they take care of themselves. I'd like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsor, Daikin, leading innovation in heating, air conditioning, and ventilation technology for over 100 years, whose generous support makes this interview and the Well Executive platform possible. So let's get right into it. Chrissa is a force. She's the CEO of Pagitsas Advisors. She is the former head of ESG and of green financing at Fannie Mae, a government-sponsored enterprise that bolsters the housing market in the US, and a first-term member of our IWBI Governance Council. She's also a best-selling author, a mom, and an outdoor enthusiast. Chrissa and I go way back. We first crossed paths when she served on the board of the US Green Building Council, and when I was heading up the Center for Green Schools. And again, years later, when we were fellow board members for Habitable, which is formerly the Healthy Building Network. So I was so thrilled when she accepted our invitation to serve on our governance council. If you don't know, IWBI's Governance Council is a key group of powerhouses, doctors, public health professionals, academics, business executives, who are responsible for helping us to uphold the rigor and integrity of the WELL standard. Council members also provide the team at IWBI with incredible guidance as we seek to accelerate market transformation across the globe. Chrissa has taken the stage at several of our WELL summits, and she is always a crowd favorite, which is why I'm so psyched for all of you to get to know her a little bit better as a person and as a professional. And as ever, we would love to hear from you. So as you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box or into the chat, and I'll try and sprinkle them in throughout the presentation, or the conversation rather. Okay, so Chrissa, let's get a little warmed up here. In the spirit of this series and on a scale of 1 to 10, how well are you feeling today?
That is a great question. I will give you my candid answer. I'm probably feeling a 10 out of 10 to be here. I will say on a personal front, I'm probably feeling a 6 because I've got a graduating child and there are a lot of emotions, excitement and sadness when a child moves from one stage of school to another. And it's a little overwhelming. So happy to be here. But it's often complicated, right?
Yeah,
Happy to be here, but
totally.
a little sad, a little happy at the same time for my child. So
I can so relate to that as a parent with only a 2-year-old. Like, I find all of these passings of different chapters, different phases to be really bittersweet. So I just
yeah.
need all of these parents around me to continue to tell me every stage gets better. Although one parent recently said to me, every stage gets better until it gets worse. Like, it's impossible when they're teenagers. So I suppose I have that to look forward to. And so do you. Well, congratulations on your graduate. And thank you for making the time for this, because you're going to be rushing off to volunteer at graduation as soon as we're done with
Yeah,
this webcast.
that's right. That's right.
All right. Let's keep a fast pace going for the start of this interview. I like to do a rapid fire round of questions. So if you're ready to go, I know you've been through this with me at least once before. So I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions, and you answer them as quickly as possible, and we'll move to the next one.
Yep.
The number one, easy one. What is your breakfast of champions?
Oh, I love a good bowl of oatmeal with blueberries. Probably the ratio is a cup of blueberries, maybe half a cup of oatmeal. I love my blueberries in the morning.
You and my son both. All right. How about one piece of career advice that you'll never forget?
Oh, uh, do not burn bridges.
Mm,
Do not burn
that,
bridges.
I
You,
wish I learned that
yeah,
one earlier.
yeah. You can be unhappy, you can say your truth, but do not burn the bridge.
Totally. Favorite place to unwind where you feel your wellest?
Mm, a beach in Greece. I see we've got folks from
Mm,
Greece. Yasu and Magalia, hello. And I would say a beach in Greece since I am Greek and gives me a lot of peace to be there.
mm, good answer. Podcasts or playlists? Which one are you most likely to be listening to?
Playlist. When I'm doing a workout, I need something that is just energetic. But I love good classical music in the morning with my cup of Earl Grey
Mm,
tea.
mm. What's your favorite workout artist right now?
Caroline Gervin. She's Irish. She's fantastic. Highly recommended if you're looking for some heavy weights.
All right, I'm going to check that out in my Spotify. And if you could go back to the start of your career, one thing that you would do differently.
I would have spent more time staying connected to the people from the beginning of my career. I've been blessed to
Mm,
have 25 years of a career and I've moved from different fields, from different companies, but I think your greatest blessing is your network and
mm,
being able to pick up a phone and call somebody who's an expert in a field that you left 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago and ask them for their advice. Um,
yeah,
so nurture the network from the beginning.
mm, beautifully said. All right, last question in the speed round. The last question that you asked AI.
Oh, that's a great one. Um, I asked AI to tell me all about sustainable aviation fuels. I keynoted yesterday at the Global Business Travelers Association. I am not an SAF expert, but I was speaking with leaders across multiple airlines and travel and hospitality, and I just wanted to geek out on how sustainable aviation fuel works, and AI delivered.
So cool. I
Yeah.
just met a woman who's working on sustainability and human health, in particular air quality in space. And wow, that was such a fascinating conversation to think about what is the same in space and what is
Oh,
completely different.
sick.
Very, very cool. One of the best conversations I've had lately. And I'm looking forward to this conversation as well. So let's get into the heart of the
Yeah.
conversation. I want to talk a little bit about what has motivated you to do the work that you do. So when I
Mm.
look at your CV, which is insanely impressive on so many levels. Like you established Fannie Mae's green financing business and you position them as the largest issuer of green bonds globally. You are part of a leadership team of a Fortune 50 company. You wrote a best-selling book, Chief Sustainability Officers at Work. You are today a trusted advisor of a variety of publicly traded companies through your company that you founded in your own name.
Mhm.
Um, when I look at that list of achievements, I would describe your career as purpose driven. But I mentioned that to you recently, and you said you had never really thought about your career in that way. So I'm curious to
Yeah,
know what has motivated your career choices. Like, what has been your true north for navigating your professional journey?
I it is interesting, especially how many workshops, how many books, how many keynotes, how many town halls there are about purpose. Um, so it's not to discount that we should not know our purpose. It wasn't really, Rachel, until you asked me that I thought, am I a purpose-driven person? And I would have probably said no until you asked it, and I really had to think about it. I really frame what drives me as two things. One, I step into the breach. I step into holes.
Mm,
I step into gaps, right? And I think it's more of a I need to serve and solve. So I see that our air quality is deteriorating. I feel the heat here in Washington, D.C. different than I did 25 years ago. And I also see income disparity increasing, and the list goes on and on. And so I've stepped into the breach, stepped into the gap. I can't fill every single one. But my area that I stepped into was, how do I make the built environment better, right? For families, low income families, individuals, by better quality housing, reducing their costs, making sure that the air is better indoors, and making sure that the cold air doesn't breeze in the winters.
Mm.
So that's my purpose, is filling in the gap. I just hadn't framed it in terms of that is a purpose-driven life, you
Well,
know?
I love your framing of serve and solve, and kind of similar to my own personal mantra, which I've described as always be winning for good.
Mm,
Like always be solving problems, but
right.
problems, for me, the most fulfilling problems to solve are the ones
Yeah.
that actually help people live better lives. You've won lots of awards. You were just reminding us of the award that you won while I was at USGBC 10 years ago, a decade
I know. I
ago.
had to look at the date. I was like, it was 2015, the Leadership
Wow.
Award. Yeah,
What a different time, but it still
I know.
seems somehow like yesterday. Um, you've been interviewed on mainstream TV. You've keynoted on many an important stage in front of crowds large and small. When you look back on this amazing span of professional achievements and victories, what's the thing you're most proud of? What's the standout achievement that you look back on and think like, yeah, that was pretty epic?
So sometimes you don't know something is going to be epic when you start it. And I think that's right. The joy, the benefit, the gift of hindsight, looking back, is like, oh yeah, that was pretty amazing.
Mhm.
Um, I point to a partnership, candidly, a partnership between Fannie Mae and the US Environmental Protection Agency, the US EPA, and its Energy Star program. And some of you might be familiar with the Energy Star program, some of you may not, but it is a long-standing 30-year program that creates a standard in the United States for building, so you can compare an office building in New York City to one in Chicago, um, even churches and hospitality places. So apples to apples, right? No matter their size. Well, there wasn't that apples to apples comparison and that 1 to 100 score for the multifamily buildings. So apartment buildings like the one that I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so the partnership was, Fannie Mae would put up the money, work with industry organizations, other building owners, and other industry associations, and get the data from hundreds of buildings across the United States and give it to the US EPA so they could run regressions, do the data analysis, and then create this tool for everybody to use, right? So there was the gap, no tool, no way to compare. And the way to serve was marshal the relatively modest capital that a large organization like Fannie Mae could afford to do, get the data, and give it to the EPA so they could serve the real estate industry for the apartment building and deliver this 1 to 100 rating. Um, I still talk about it over 10, almost 12, maybe 13 years later. And I do consider it one of the hallmarks of public-private partnership. When coming together, you fill in that gap. Even
Mm,
though that's a
mm,
US example, Rachel, I think it's replicable around the world. And I see we've got people from Holland, how do, we've got Dubai, we've got global attendance here. I think it's not just a US example that can happen. It's everywhere that you can make this type of partnership work.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the most impressive things about Energy Star has just been the scale of the impact and the just how widespread adoption
Yeah.
has been, and also the ways in which it has influenced or informed other programs across the world. On our governance council, you and I are also serving alongside another first term member, Brendan Owens. And I
Yes.
remember when he left USGBC, after having been in charge of the lead program development for many years, he said, the thing I miss most is the scale.
Yeah.
of the impact.
Yeah.
And it's almost addictive, to work on something that if it's successful, can have just these tremendous, impacts, can make a tremendous ripple over time. And certainly Energy Star is a good example of that.
Well,
So
maybe
that's something that,
could I actually take that a little bit? I mean,
yeah,
I have a feeling you know where you want to go, but I actually want to dig into that a little bit, especially as
yeah,
we've
please.
got people on the call and you and I having conversation about what is really a leader. I do think that that balance of when are you having large scale impact and where are you having smaller ripple effect impact is something that we all as leaders need to recognize, right? When I stepped down for my role at Fannie Mae after being there over a decade, right? Founder of the green financing business, founder of the ESG strategy, right? For a major company. And then I became just an author, right? And then I became just a small business owner. It was a big shift, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
not changing policy. I'm not creating public-private partnerships. But what I realized is that by being a quieter backseat advisor, I was actually then creating bigger ripple effects with my clients in the way that I advise them. And I strengthened their ability to be able to make the big splashes, to make
Right.
um, the big jumps, the big leaps, the big announcements. And I think it's good for us as leaders, no matter the size of our organization, sometimes to take a step back and say, I don't need to be in the limelight. I'm not the one making the big splash. Um, and really think about how we enable others.
Yeah.
So I offer that up maybe as also, you don't have to be at a big company. You don't have to be at the
Right.
EPA or at a Fannie Mae or at a US Green Building Council or right. We all
Right.
have the ability to coach and make impact. It's just, it might be a different tool.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point that there are many different ways to scale
Right.
what it is that you have to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think about that a lot in my own capacity as the head of IWBI. Like, it is so much more powerful for me to help 100 of my staff members to be successful in their own leadership than for me to focus on my own. And some could definitely say that that's been a weakness of my tenure as CEO, that I've probably been too internally focused and not externally focused enough.
Okay.
And I think that's less strategic than it has been just a comfort zone for me. Like, I really have to push myself to be out in front. But what I love the most is the work with the team and setting all of them up for success. And I hope that's served us well. I think the best indicator of that is like every time I meet someone who does a lot of work with IWBI, they say the most incredible thing about IWBI is every person we meet is as amazing as the last. And like,
That's
nothing
amazing.
is better than that. I want to come back to your philosophy on
Sure.
leading teams and
Mm-hmm.
helping to set people up for their best work. But
Mm-hmm.
before that, you talked about what you're most proud of in your career.
Mm-hmm.
What about what has given you the most meaning or happiness in your work? Because I think sometimes those two things can be really different.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you asked that because the I have had different roles and different types of experiences, right? When I left in 2021, Fannie Mae, right? We were in the midst of COVID. It was March of 2021. We'd been it for a year. Um, and things were still uncertain. And I have two boys. They were obviously younger, and it was hard. It was hard.
Yeah.
I have my spouse, he has a career. I mean, so
Yeah.
no need to relive that. But where I'm going with this is that um, sitting down and interviewing 25 other leaders, chief sustainability officers, heads of ESG for other companies,
Mm.
brought me contemplative joy because I was
Mm.
able to distill and think and reflect about the similarities and differences of our experiences. And when you're
Mm.
in a role where you're go, 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 and you've got such big expectations and there's high stakes, you don't candidly have a chance to take a step back often and really zoom out. Sure, you'll do a 6-month look back, sure, you'll do a year in review, but it's not sort of that big strategic piece. And so it really brought me joy to do that, to see the themes across IKEA and Verizon and BlackRock and all these other great leaders about how they were leading. But I
Let's talk
will,
about the, oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I was going to
Go
say
ahead.
one other piece. I was going to say, but the writing piece was hard. I
Yeah.
hadn't written that way before,
Yeah.
right? Again, memos, decks, sure, white papers, fine. But not sort of like, how do you write for, how do you blend, um how do you blend storytelling with facts in a very kind of squishy field of sustainability, and yet still make it relevant for board members to people who are still maybe at the beginning of their career. So there was also moments of really hard, like, I can't do this. I'm going to give up. I
Yeah.
can't write this book. Um, but that gave me joy when I realized that I could. So maybe a
Mm,
very nuanced
mm.
answer, Rachel, but
No, I love that. I mean,
uh,
it takes such discipline too to be a writer, to write a book. Like
uh,
you have to have this intrinsic motivation to keep going back to
yeah,
the blank page, which
yes,
is
yes,
scary.
yes.
Um, I want to invite you to do a little shameless name dropping about the book because the list of companies that were affiliated with your interviews is unbelievable. So, a little bit of name dropping, and then I want to ask you a bit
Sure.
more about some of your takeaways from the conversations you had.
You want me to go? You want me to do some name dropping?
Oh yeah, I'm ready for you to do the name
So
dropping.
you
I
got some
did I
favorites.
did
Okay.
capture the list in case you needed a reminder, but I
Oh no,
figure
I was like,
you'll know.
I'm curious who she's gonna call out. So Pia Heidenmark Cook, former Chief Sustainability Officer at IKEA. She had just left her role. She is incredible. Virginie Elias, Procter and
Mhm.
Gamble, totally different industry. Consumer packaged goods, global company. Um, she's also incredible. Um, Frank O'Brien Bernini from Owens Corning, manufacturing,
Mhm.
insulation, glass. My goodness, what an incredible leader. We have I of course had to do my financial services, so that's where BlackRock and Barclays came into play.
JP
Kara,
Morgan.
yep, JP Morgan, Kara Hurst from Amazon, Jim
Mhm.
Gowan, Verizon. Um, so I think if you're looking for a book to share perspectives from multiple industries, not just real estate. In fact, there's only one technically real estate company in there. It's Jones Lang LaSalle.
Hello.
Um, Cynthia Curtis, also amazing. Um, this is the book because it's not intended to be a how to do sustainability, how to do well, it's more about how do you lead in a new, relatively new field that blends impact and purpose with business.
Yes.
And that is actually relatively complex when you compare it to other leadership positions, such as the chief financial officer, right? There is a very clear track for a CFO that, frankly, is relatively simple. It's very straightforward in comparison to the type of leadership skills that a chief sustainability needs to offer. Um, and the biggest one is, candidly, and I think we see this not only in sustainability, we see this clearly in the well space. We see this absolutely in places where you both own everything, you're responsible for the well-being of every single employee, right?
Right.
As the chief health and wellness officer, for example,
Mhm.
or the lead on well,
Right.
and you do not have any straight lines, direct lines to any of those employees, and perhaps not even to the levers that influence how they operate. And
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
tough. You're responsible for
Right.
everything with no direct control. It's
Hmm.
tough. It's exciting and it's tough, and you have to be
Yeah.
aware of that balance.
so many different types of executives from so many different places, from so many different sectors. You had to distill what you
Mhm.
heard across those interviews into some common truths or some common themes.
Yeah.
Um, Talk a little bit about some of your most important
Yeah.
takeaways.
Yeah, the I did not go into it knowing I did not go in with a hypothesis. The
Mhm.
hypothesis was my own experience, right? Like what from my own experience was going to be replicated in others or seen in others. And where was my experience a flash in the pan, kind of one hit wonder? Nope, can't do it again. But it turns out that my experience and the experience of these leaders did share five commonalities. And I talk about this as the 5 Ps framework. Um, one is know the priorities. You're like, oh, of
Mm,
course I know my priorities. I would actually argue that most people don't. And if they do, they have too many,
mhm,
right? So it's really know the priorities of the business. What are
mm,
shareholders expecting? What is the CFO expecting? What is the CEO expecting?
yeah.
Know those priorities and then speak to those priorities.
Mm,
Two, pilots. You have to invest in pilots. And pilots doesn't have to be a $10 million pilot, doesn't even have to be a $1 million pilot. It could be just a small process change that requires 2 hours of difference a week. But you have to test and you have to learn. And what I talk about a lot, Rachel, is you have to fail at the pilot. If you sell a pilot as being successful, you've done it wrong.
mm,
Pilots need to fail because they're the first attempt in learning. So
mm,
priorities, pilots. The third one, no surprise, partnerships. Right? Broker unconventional partnerships. Who should you be talking to that probably is not in the room with you today? Partnerships, absolutely. And then the last two, candidly, are the hardest and the longest. It is
mm,
to catalyze process change, right?
mhm.
So, what is that pilot that now becomes embedded in your company?
Right.
And then, how do you integrate it into your products, right? So, again, this is all about health, sustainability, not being over here on the side, but being
Mhm,
core to your organization's work. So,
mm, mm,
know the priorities, invest in pilots, build partnerships, catalyze process change, and integrate into the products. That
mm.
is what successful leaders do, and they do it over and over again.
I love every single one of those examples and relate to each and every one of them. Um, you talked about the importance of pilots, which interestingly enough, I taught and was a guest lecturer at an executive education course for whole system sustainability at Harvard with Leith Sharp for a number of years. And and many chief sustainability officers came through this program and were interviewed in the creation of the curriculum. And this was something that emerged um, consistently across pretty much everyone we spoke to is the importance of pilots. But what I love about what you said about pilots is the importance of failure, because we often think about pilots as a means to demonstrate success at a small scale and then
Nope.
scale those successes. And I find this to be something really quite unusual about you as a leader, that you are willing to talk so openly and bravely about your own failures. Like you're not afraid to name something as a failure. And there's such power in that. And yet I find that that is really quite rare in a leader. Um, and it makes your relationship to this notion of failure really notable. So, can you give us an example of a time in your career when you failed? And uh,
The list is
what did you
long.
learn from it?
How long do you have, Rachel?
30 minutes to be
Yeah, 30
precise.
minutes. Okay, I can definitely fill 30 minutes of failures. Yeah, I will absolutely talk about failure. And actually it's not you know, it's 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 not one hmm. It might be controversial actually that I'm defining it as a failure,
Mm,
actually. So there's even that element. Would love your perspective on it and certainly from the chat. where I failed is in sharing the limelight.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is when we as leaders, no matter our age, no matter our maturity in our careers, have really spent a lot of time doing something, we
mm,
often do want the credit. I mean, because we've been fighting for something, advocating, influencing, calculating. It's been hard and we care about it and we finally want to be recognized for it. Not only to have the
mm,
impact, not only to deliver the deliverable, but it's good to, somebody to pat you on the back, to give you an award, to be on a podcast, to be interviewed and right?
yeah.
But candidly, I rarely succeeded, if ever, alone.
Mm,
Truly. Like really. I
mhm,
mean,
mhm,
even the book, A Very Solitary Experience, was only because my husband was supportive, the generosity of all the people that I interviewed. I had an incredible content editor who really thought through the development of the stories, right? It wasn't me, it was a
mm,
group of people. And
mm,
so where I failed early on was, particularly at Fannie Mae, to be candid, is um, when there was a recognition for the first loan going out, the first green
mm, mm,
bond going out, or an opportunity to explain the new process at the employee town hall, I should
mm,
have shared the limelight with other people.
mm,
I should have
mm,
had a team member be on stage, either with me or presenting on behalf of me. Or
mm, mm.
when Bloomberg wanted to do an interview on podcast, I should have had the originator who closed the deal
Yeah,
either do the interview or be there with me. Um,
yeah.
and so is it a failure? No, in the sense of there wasn't a big consequence, there was no big penalty. I didn't get fired for it, but I
Mhm,
think it's
mhm,
a failure to accelerate, right? I
mm,
didn't I yes, I succeeded in the end, sure, happy
yeah,
ending. Could we have gotten there faster? Maybe.
yeah,
Maybe if
yeah,
I had shared the limelight. Not to say I hogged it all the time. I want to say I
yeah,
do
yeah,
like probably could point to places where I did, but candidly, could there have been an opportunity? I think yes.
yeah.
So
Some of the best leaders that I know, part of what makes them so great is that they have this natural ability to know exactly who to recognize and when. Like Rick Fedrizzi, this is one of his superpowers. He's also a fellow governance council member. Like he always knows how to shine the limelight on the right person at the right time to just like make their hearts explode with pride and make them feel
exactly.
recommitted to their work. Jason Hartkey on our team,
Yeah.
another great example of that
Yeah.
emotion. And I just really marvel at that natural instinct. I think a lot of leaders have to work harder at it. And I also think I'd be curious of your take on this, that this can be something that's particularly challenging for women or other marginalized leaders or
Absolutely.
underrepresented leaders. And I remember this like turning point in my career, but in particular in my time as a manager. I went to this leadership development course at the Center for Creative Leadership, and we were asked to draw a picture of where we had been in our career. And
Mhm.
then we were asked to draw a picture of where we were going. And I drew this very poorly drawn, like stick figure kind of image of me sprinting up the stairs. Like I had, at that point, I was in my 20s still. I had to be so scrappy. I had to like fight hard for the
I
resources,
know.
the staffing, and it felt like there weren't a lot of seats at the table for someone like me. And in that image that I drew, I was like just getting over the steepest step. And then when I was asked to think about what I wanted my career to look like going forward, it was like me turning around to lift other people up. It was like this moment when I realized like I have the power that I was looking for. And now it's time for me to think about how to like use that for good or give that away. Which is not to say that like this was a turning point and now I did that forever. It was just like this moment of inflection where I thought, I don't have to be so scrappy anymore. And I can afford to be much more generous in giving away power and giving away credit, you know?
Well, and I think that's the very real tension, right? Because I had a similar conversation actually just yesterday at the conference, um, with someone, an African American woman, senior leader in her industry, and she said, I'm struggling with this because I agree with you, but I need a seat at the table.
Right.
And it is the benefit of being where I am today that I can generously share the limelight,
Hmm.
right? Sort
Right.
of to your point, like you looking down the stairs and pulling people up,
Yeah.
right? But the very true reality is that when we're starting our careers, particularly as women or of a marginalized group, you need to fight for a seat at the table. And you often when you share the limelight, you don't get credit for having shared the limelight.
Mm.
It's a
Mm.
very real tension, right? Your generosity may go overlooked, and then you
Mm.
are in
Mm.
a, I would say, worse position, but certainly haven't advanced.
Right. Well, you get credit from the people who you acknowledged, but maybe not the people that you're most trying to impress. Yeah.
Exactly. So it is
Yeah.
a tough
Yeah.
tension. So it's not one to say that if I could rewind the clock, that I would be perfect, that I would never be in the limelight. But I think you
Mm.
can share more, even when you're
Yeah.
earlier in your career. And I think that really does, right? It's that pay it forward. It's that invest in order to reap the rewards later. So it might not
Hmm.
have the immediate gratification as being, right, the on stage at the employee town hall, right?
Yeah.
That immediate gratification, but maybe it pays dividends when that person who is on stage does call you and say, hey, next big project, I want you to lead it. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
balance. It's not
It
easy, but
is
it's a
like
balance.
so many things in career and life.
Yeah.
Um, I want to shift gears because
Sure.
I know that there are probably at least a few people on the line who are really curious to hear your current take, given all of the work that you do, and in particular, the guidance that you provide to your clients on ESG and
Yep.
sustainability.
Yes.
What do you see as the state of those two concepts today? I mean, particularly in the US, I know we have a lot of friends who are dialing in from outside the US. You're the ones that keep asking, what is going on over there? Like, what is
What
it like to
going
be,
on?
living through this moment when ESG has become something of a four-letter word where sustainability in many circles is viewed as kind of persona non grata. And you and I have talked about this a bit. I've been like tapping into you to try and get a pulse. From where I sit, I hear a lot of companies say, we're going to keep doing what we're doing, but we're going to just talk about it differently, or maybe we'll even talk about it a little less. Is that really true? In some ways, my impression is that's true for some, but in the case of other companies, there are companies that are talking about it less and doing less as well. What do you see from where you're sitting?
So there is, in this current environment, no one playbook for every company.
Hmm.
I will say that when it comes to ESG, that very
Hmm.
specific acronym, environmental social governance, yes, I'm seeing a pullback on that term.
Hmm.
So 2024 reports are coming out. I'm going to call them impact reports, just to keep it a
Yeah.
very broad term. If there was the term ESG in it before, they've removed it from the title, and maybe there are
Yeah.
less appearances of it as an acronym in the
Yeah.
impact report. However, once you see a business through the lens of environmental risk, social risk, and governance
Mm.
risk, you cannot unsee it. At least not any reasonable business leader that we want running companies, whether in the US, Europe, Asia, globally.
Right.
So where you'll see companies still committed to is, okay, there is an environmental risk around flooding, for example. I can't unsee that. We still need to mitigate that.
Yeah.
Social risk, social impact.
Hmm.
We still need committed employees, especially as we have an aging population, especially as we have challenges with pipeline. We
Yeah.
need employees. You cannot unsee that risk. So,
Totally.
so the programs companies are still committed to, they're committed to. Is there a pullback on the ESG acronym? Yes. Is there a pullback um, on the commitments? I have not seen that.
Okay.
So one of the industries that my firm supports is pharmaceuticals industry. Lots of leaders in that space, from AstraZeneca to Pfizer to Amgen to smaller companies like Biogen. They have not pulled back. They still have commitments around supplier decarbonization, for example, commitment to patient and access to medicines. Those are E and S's, and they're still going strong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to stay on that optimistic note, I would say that that is generally true of what we see from our clients, but like your clients, they're somewhat self-selecting.
That's right.
But I also think it's important to keep in mind that talking about it less is doing less. Like you not talking about as an organization the importance of inclusion and not sponsoring or marching in the Pride Parade is doing less for employees um,
That's right.
who don't feel as taken care of, who don't feel as secure or psychologically safe. And so yeah, it saddens me to see some of that, but I'm encouraged that the momentum seems to continue outside of the United States in many other places. And in fact, one of our global uh, leaders within IWBI, I won't name names or the place that person hails from, said it's almost like where I am, we're thumbing our nose at what's happening in the US. Like we're saying, like, we're going to dig in even harder. And this is something that we heard early days from our governance council before you joined, when we said, look at what's happening out there. Should we be pulling back ourselves? Have we made a mistake by leaning so hard into some of these concepts, particularly around ESG, around equity? And, their guidance was universally stay the course. The pendulum will swing the other way. The arc of history is long, and we took that to heart. It's probably one of the most important conversations we ever had.
Look, I don't want to sweep under the rug that there has been pullback, especially around some social issues, including
Mm,
pride and diversity. I don't,
mhm,
especially here in the United States, it's Pride Month, and it is a very important time for inclusion, commemorating, celebrating the LGBTQ plus community. And there has been a pullback in terms of commitments and dollars that fund those
mhm. Yeah,
events. So I don't want to be like, oh, everything is fine. It's not.
right, right.
Where I'm trying to balance is where we are today with a pullback. It feels better than where we were 5 or 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I am trying to take the long
Right.
view, even if on a day-to-day basis, unfortunately, sadly, it's has a psychological impact. So it's
Mm,
tough. So I don't want to sweep that
yeah.
under the rug. I do feel, Rachel, that I'm a global citizen, even though I've
Mhm,
grown up and spent most of my life here in the United States. I was born in Canada to Greek immigrants, grew up
mhm,
in Cambridge, didn't become a US citizen until I was 17. I've lived in Spain, I've lived in Holland, I've
mm,
traveled to the Philippines, and again, just global global perspective here. Yes, the US is important, GDP, trade, fine. I need to see leadership and strength from global leaders on doing the right thing. So, as
yeah.
much as we see turning to the United States for signals, and it's tough to be a leader when a power like the United States is doing something that is not in the best interest of humanity, candidly, we do need to see leadership come from people from the rest of the world. And so
Mm,
that's what I'm
mm,
leaning into is sure, look to the United States, but it cannot be and should not be the be all and end all.
Yeah, well, I don't, my impression is it's not. Yasushi, who's on the line, has, spoken about, you
Absolutely.
know, that the work continues, the momentum continues,
Exactly.
in Japan where he lives,
I
which is
love
keeping me going right now.
which
I'll
is
tell you
yes,
that.
and Yasushi is 100% right.
Yeah.
right? The work is not only important to lead in wherever you're from, but also it's going to have different needs. I mean, it's
Yep.
not a one size fits all, right? There are
Yeah.
regional differences, there are cultural differences. We actually need to lean into those and lean into them as
Hmm.
strengths. So, um,
Right.
I say we keep moving forward, and we also are need to be supportive on a day-to-day basis for people that are feeling
Hmm.
in a place of lack of safety because of what's happening in the United States.
So talk about how this played out in different geographies.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a moment about how it might play out in other sectors, because there's a really good question that
Sure.
came in from Hanan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. In the Q&A box. He says, she says, thanks, Chrissa, for sharing your experiences. I'm wondering if you had the chance to work with universities, and if so, what do you see there? Is there anything that was drastically different?
Sure, it's a great question. Thank you, Hanan. Yes, I have the pleasure of teaching. This last, actually a year ago, I was going to say this summer, it was a year ago summer, I did a day-long master class at the Columbia School of Public Health, their Masters in Public
Mm,
Health program. And in that conversation, these were MPH students who are part-time, so professionals working for major US healthcare organizations or global healthcare organizations. And what I saw is their high interest in sustainability and understanding
mm,
the well and the health and wellness perspective that we talk about, Rachel, with the International
mm,
Well
mm,
Building Institute, but they hadn't thought about the intersection as closely, right? They're thinking about the human
mm,
body as
mm,
a
mm,
system, but haven't been thinking about the system fully of the environment that the human lives in, at least not so closely. And so one comment is I do think that we need to still integrate in academia, university programs, that this is not a siloed thinking and
yeah.
approach and products and impact over here, and we do business health, surgery, you know over here, just thinking about the health industry
Yep.
as one. We actually need to bring that closer, and it needs to come through in education.
Mm, mm.
I,
Yeah, I sit on a board that exclusively works on sustainability issues in higher education, and I would also add to that that at least in this present moment, um, higher education is so dependent on federal funding.
Mhm.
Um, it has been distressing, maybe even disappointing to see um, some universities who have really pulled back on a lot of their commitments, a lot of their programs and offerings for students because of that fear. And yet you really can't fault them. I was talking to one friend at an Ivy League university, and she's faculty there, and she was saying, you know, we went to the administration to say, like, this isn't okay. Like, we need to continue to stay the course in our commitments to diversity and equity was what this conversation was about. And she said, well, one of the leaders of the hospital system, the children's hospital, in fact, at our university, was present in the room, and he said, an impossible choice that we're being asked to make, a choice between freedom of speech and
yeah,
um, providing care, life or death, care to patients. So I do not envy the position that higher education is in. On the other hand, positive note, what I also have seen is that, higher education, their biggest stakeholders are their students and their alumni.
that's right.
And and so students have agency within higher education. They have a voice. They have an opportunity to drive forward priorities of their administrations. And I think that um, especially if we look back over the course of history, is something that we can feel hopeful about. That this next generation sees, for instance, that their lives will um, probably be less comfortable than the lives that their parents lived because of climate change, that they're going to inherit these problems that we can't solve in our lifetime. And their ongoing commitment to these ideas, like their sense of responsibility, for instance, for planetary care, it makes higher education a really different place than, for instance, corporate environments.
Look, I will say that the pressures are real, and especially in the United States, where the federal funding is critical to
Yeah,
education.
yeah,
And your point, though, about what the future will look like is we have, even today, far more educated people coming through universities at the undergrad level, not even at the grad school
mhm,
level, who have had some exposure to sustainability, health and wellness, ecosystem, biodiversity. There are lots of different courses that students do take that didn't exist 15 years ago, even 10 years ago,
yeah,
even candidly 5 years ago. Um,
yeah,
and to me, even that exposure does change the trajectory of what their expectations are and how they're going to operate. Are they going to
yeah,
be deep into it like all of us here on the call? Maybe, maybe not. But is there an exposure that we didn't have? Absolutely. And so that's where I'm staying optimistic that we have
yeah,
the knowledge and a growing acceleration, right? An acceleration
yeah,
of people who will help us achieve the goals that we're trying to get to. So
mm,
it's
mm,
challenging, but I feel optimistic.
yeah, yeah. Most days I do too. Um, Krista, I feel like in your tenure on the governance council, we're almost borrowing you from
Yeah.
a lot of the dedicated work that you do around, decarbonization, sustainability, more, I guess, of a focus on the E historically over the course of your career than perhaps the S. And I feel especially lucky to have wooed you to the governance council because the very day that I was like working up the nerve to ask you to consider joining the council, you told me that you were going to be transitioning off of the board that we were currently serving on together because you were feeling kind of overextended. And I thought, okay, this is not good timing. But amazingly, you said yes. And so I'm curious as to why you did and what it was that was intriguing to you about the work that IWBI is doing and maybe the healthy building and people first organization movement writ large.
I think that's, you just said it, Rachel, actually. The people first movement. And it's not to say
Mm,
my prior board or boards plural didn't care about people, but I do think that the work that your team, the organization is leading is very much putting the people first in a way that candidly is not soft.
yeah,
With me on
yeah,
this, Rachel.
yep,
Right. And I, again, coming from a background of financial services, of real estate,
mm,
of the energy industry, pharma, thinking about, metrics and numbers and counting, I see the work that you're doing is absolutely people first, but
mm, mm,
grounded in a way that brings in a much more nuanced, data-driven conversation that
yep,
makes it irrefutable.
yep,
Yes, we should all care about people. Yes, we should all care about health and feeling good and being a 10 out of 10. But
right,
how do we get there? Let's bring some structure around it. Let's
yeah,
bring it
yeah,
together. So I think that's one. And then candidly, this is me fangirling to you, is your leadership. The way that you do invest in your team
mm,
means a lot, right? The fact that you even critiqued yourself for being too internally focused
mm,
earlier in the conversation. And I know your team and I have met them. I'm mentoring one of them. You
yeah,
can't have a successful visionary company without having a strong team.
mm,
And
mm,
that's the magic combination that you bring and your team
mm,
brings. And I wanted to be a part of that and candidly learn myself and continue to grow. So, you know, it's you, you you see the future in what you're doing, and I think we
mm,
all need to be a part of the future, not just focused
mm,
on today and the challenges of today and the hardship of today. It's the hope of the
yeah.
future, and that's what you bring.
Well, thank you so much for that. And going back to what you were saying about, being data driven, you've been quite outspoken about this in the broader field of sustainability. Like we don't have the luxury of being soft. or constantly being asked to defend the
Yeah,
return on investment of, you know, people first strategies, of healthy building strategies, of green building strategies. I think it was Sarah Neff who said, nobody ever asked me to justify the ROI of my Christmas decorations, but I have to justify the return on investment of sustainability all day.
all
And
day.
that is the reality of the world that we live in. And I think it's why we've felt it's so important to take that truly evidence-based
Yeah,
approach. The time flies. We have just a couple more minutes. And there was one more question that I really wanted to ask you before we bring this to a
sure.
close. And that is your one tip for being a truly well executive. If you could offer us one tip for the future, what would that be?
I'm going to offer you two. Um,
Deal.
I think if as leaders, let's think big and strategic. Think about who you as an individual are going to partner with to help you grow. This is not mentorship. This is not having a
Mhm.
networking coffee. This is really who is going to be the person that helps you grow as a leader to give you the strength to move forward and to ask you the
Mhm.
hard questions. And when you really use that definition versus a networking coffee or a former colleague, I would
Mhm.
argue that most of us have a very short list. So,
Yeah.
who is that going to be? The second is actually out your window. And it's behind me and it's out my window, which is get outside.
Mm.
Get outside. Walk. You don't have to run. But I find that when I am at my lowest point, it's because I've been behind the desk, I've been on the Zoom call, and I need to be outside. And
Yeah.
thank you to everybody who has joined live. I hope some of you have taken it as a walk and listen.
Mm.
Maybe for the future recordings, it's a walk and listen outside. But I think we need as individuals to be thinking about the future because the future is outside and we need to
Mhm.
experience it.
Mm.
So
Nature deficit is real. The research supports exactly what you're saying, that being outside and having access to nature boosts mood and
that,
focus and gives us that sense of connection to place. In our most recent annual employee survey, this was one of the biggest areas that surfaced for our own employees was not enough time being spent outside. So we've been trying to inspire each other with different challenges that Susan, our head of workplace well-being, has been hosting and just be modeling good behavior by taking the walking meetings, like you said.
yeah.
Chrissa, thank you. Thank you for just all of your wisdom and your honesty and vulnerability. Um, I'm so glad that some of our community got to know you a little bit better in your incredible brand of leadership. This Well Executive platform, including the webcast series and a podcast series that will be coming to you soon, allows you to get an opportunity to get up and close with some of the most epic leaders of our time. And you are no exception. I'd like
Thank you.
to thank Daikin one more time, whose generous support makes this series and burgeoning platform possible. Cheers to the next 100 years of innovation. Before we close, please be sure to sign up for updates on podcast and webcast releases through the link in the chat. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn and all the other places for updates regarding Well Executive. We look forward to seeing you on our next one. And until then, be well, lead well, and live well. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much. This was lovely.
And it's a wrap.